In spite of the fact that nobody wanted to marry this poor fat mail-order bride, a man from a wealthy family eventually did marry her. The train hissed as if it were suffering from a lack of patience. The fractured platform beneath the smoke was baking in the glare of the frontier, and the smoke curled into the sky like a prayer that was too heavy to rise. It was just enough for her gloved hands to tremble for them to be concealed below the folds of her wrinkled white dress when May Whitlow gently stepped off the last car. The outfit had been sewn by her mother during a time when lace was still purchased with coins rather than through promises. At this point, it was clinging to May's large hips, and the bodice was a bit too tight. It was obvious that it was not designed for travel in heat like today. It was her borrowed boots that dug into her heels since they were too thin. Despite this, she maintained a confident demeanor. Around her, the town of Dry River, which was a station, seemed to be waking up, only to see a scene that it had seen before. The legs of a few young boys were swung out from the water trough. After staring for a moment, an older woman hastily averted her gaze and shaded her eyes. While the mailman was cleaning his glasses with a dirty cloth, he suddenly stopped what he was doing and gave the man who was standing next to him a gentle push. May experienced everything, from every glance to every murmur. Despite the fact that it was not new, it continued to sting in areas that she believed had previously been scarred over. It was one page of careful penmanship that promised marriage, home, and dignity, and she clung to the letter in her hand like it was a life rope from her grasp. Mr. Horace Bell, a ranch hand who is 32 years old, is looking for a strong woman who has a compassionate attitude. There is no mention of attractiveness. There is no flattery, just a matter of practicality. That was something that May had enjoyed. It was a few steps forward that she took. It was as if a hand was pressing down on her from the heat. Her corset caused a pinching sensation. As he approached, a slender man with greased back hair and a toothpick in his mouth walked up. He was as slow as molasses as he examined her from head to toe. "You are the bride, right?" he inquired about it. May gave a slight nod. "Dame May Whitlow. I arrived atop the train in the morning. Mr. Bell, please." The man showed a snort. After morning, Bell departed. He claimed that he had seen what had gotten off the train the day before, and that he did not want confirmation. Her chest crackled with the sound of something hollow. She turned her head away from him, thinking that he was joking, and that someone else was starting to take the initiative. On the other hand, nobody did. The platform was beginning to clear. It continued to get brighter. The man said, "You came all this way for nothing," and he did it in a manner that was not unkind but rather straightforward, as if he had witnessed rain and did not feel sorry for the sky. As May spoke, her lips shook. She pressed her teeth down on them with such force that it left a mark. "If I were to leave a message with a telegraph, would it be possible?" He made a shrugs. "In no way free." She turned around, prepared to proceed to the bench and retrieve her bag, only to discover that it had been knocked over and that one of the straps had snapped clean. The items that she owned were dispersed. Not far away, a young child stood with a guilty expression on his face and filth on his hands. As she crouched down, she proceeded to quietly gather her belongings, including a ribbon, a sewing needle case, thread, and the one and only photograph she had of her mother. A corset that dug into her ribs caused her back to hurt. Her dress's hem was pulled through the sand as she walked. But she did not make any comment. During that moment, she became aware of a distinct voice, soft, opulent, and spotless. It was a voice that was not appropriate for this community. "So allow me to assist you with that." She raised her head. Dust was not visible on the man who was standing there. He was dressed in a shirt of a light blue color that was tucked into dark pants that were well fitted, a belt made of polished leather, and boots that were too fine for fence labor. The wind had ruffled a strand of his hair across his brow, despite the fact that his hair was slicked back. Some kind of family crest that she was not familiar with was pinned to his collar in the form of a small gold pin. He crouched down next to her and carefully took up the photograph, removing any dirt that was on it with a gentle brush. May made an attempt to grab it, but insufficiently soon. The image was examined by him. And then "It's your mother." May gave a slight nod. He simply said that baby had beautiful eyes, and then he handed it over. She had no idea what to say in response. The vast majority of males either failed to see her eyes or, if they did, they continued on with a joke instead. It was finally possible for her to say, "You're not from around here." "Not at all. This is Samson Rourke. To take a look at some Mustangs, I traveled from the north to the south." May was aware of the name. Rourke was the money for cattle, the vast plains of the north. The land was so long that you could ride it for 3 days without coming into contact with the fence. Standing, she brushed her skirts off as she stood. Please accept my gratitude for the thoughtfulness, Mr. Rourke. Although he smiled, there was a frown that could be seen between his brows. I was able to overhear that your groom changed his mind. May nodded once more, but this time she did so more slowly. It appears that he did not desire what he had paid for. She did not have any resentment in her tone of speaking. It was made worse in some way by it. He cocked his head to the side. Therefore, he is a jerk. Suddenly, she let out a surprised laugh. Although it is small, it is real. The majority of men find me to be too much of a woman, according to my brothers. They might have been correct. Samson responded by saying that it's possible that the globe is too tiny for good women. It was clear that he meant what he said. I am not a flirt. No line at all. The hush that engulfed them was both gentle and profound. The rhythm of May's pulse was erratic. There had never been a man who had looked at her in such a way, as if he was contemplating something, weighing something, not condemning, not mocking, instead considering. Next, where do you plan to go? He inquired about it. I suppose I'll make my way back to the nearest city. I need to stitch for pennies until I can purchase a more suitable place in which to disappear. I get it. He was hesitant. I apologize for the boldness, but would you even consider staying? I am able to provide housing for you. It is not inappropriate. That is, until your next train arrives. May made a blinking motion. What, you'd put me up? In addition to that, he stated, and his voice then became softer. Get married to me. On a dry field, it landed with the force of thunder. It was a stare. Neither of them smiled, continued to gaze at it. My name is not familiar to you, she said. I am aware that you did not flinch when you were faced with humiliation and stood here. I know that you did not scream or plead for help. My knowledge is that the man ought to have considered himself fortunate. With a trembling step, she retreated. Is there a humor in this? It is a wager. The man did not move. No, how come? Mostly due to the fact that I do not like the way they eye you. I also find it offensive that you believe you are deserving of it. May took a gulp. There is nothing that you owe to me. Not at all, he concurred, but it's possible that I owe myself something that is superior than what is anticipated. The hand was offered by him. She was hovering her fingertips above his. Dusk was whirling about at their feet. The telegraph pole was the source of the crow's call. A loud and prolonged laugh could be heard coming from within the general shop. The globe continued to turn, yet the moment remained as if it were a breath taken in. He took her hand and placed it in his. What are you doing, and do you comprehend it? She inquired about it. Without a shred of doubt, he stated. It was a smile. Okay then, no problem. Ink and dried ink pads were the smells that emanated from the courthouse. Samson pushed the marriage license forward, and the clerk appeared to be perplexed by the presentation. It is possible to sign with steady hands, the people outside murmured softly. While she was holding her friend's arm, Julia Meeks, who was staying at the boarding home, let out a loud gasp that May was able to hear. But it didn't matter to her. They exchanged their vows in the modest chapel located behind the newspaper office, but there was no music and no flowers present. It was just heat and silence, and there was something that could not be identified. While the preacher appeared surprised, he carried out his duties. Following that, Samson led May down the steps of the church as if she were of no significant weight. Despite the fact that her fingers were still shaking, she clung to his arm tightly. Are you doing okay? He inquired about it. I have the impression that I have entered the narrative of another person, she mumbled. Perhaps we can claim it now. A room was reserved for them at the inn, beds that are separate. Nothing to anticipate. As the moon rose, May sat by the window. Her fingers slowly loosened the corset that she had been wearing for an excessive amount of time. On the other hand, the town continued to hum, and the news spread like wildfire across the dry grass. Through the glass, she was able to hear it. Did the wealthy young man marry her? It's possible that he has a weak will. Perhaps she could be a witch. May leaned toward the cool glass and laid her forehead against it. When she stared back, her reflection was red-eyed, exhausted, and full of questions. It was the knock at the door that she heard. Please come in. Samson walked in while holding something in his hands. It was a bouquet of wildflowers, and it was irregular and little. I went back and pulled these out. On the first day of marriage, I thought it would be appropriate for a lady to have flowers. She grabbed them, dumbfounded. He only gave a timid nod once.
Have a restful night, May. Have a restful night, Mr. Rourke.
In a low voice, she expressed her gratitude as he turned to go. He halted and turned his head back. To what end? In order to see me? He simply grinned and left the door slightly ajar behind him, but he did not respond to the question. Exhaling, May brought the blooms to her chest and kept them there. In the past, her world had been limited, constrained, and abrupt. On the other hand, something had broken today. There was a peculiar and tender feeling that had crept in. In addition, she allowed herself to wonder for the very first time in many years, what if the narrative was actually hers at this point? The journey to the north was lengthy, and the air became progressively cooler with each mile that they left behind Dry River. While May sat rigidly in the stagecoach, her fingers were entangled in the folds of her lap. Samson read silently next to her, his thumb pressed to a folded page that he never turned. In the distance, the plains were covered in gold and umber. The herds moved like shadows that were breathing. Dust was carried by the wind, and clouds threatened to bring rain. The western region did not alter its appearance for anyone, and May, who was now a married woman with a name that was unfamiliar to her, pondered whether or not she was expected to alter her own. Samson raised his gaze. Feeling hungry? She motioned with her head. Not at this time. He indicated his agreement with a slight nod. Respectful. No need to press. There is no pity. But the look in his eyes remained for a briefer moment. However, the hush that separated them was not silent. Unformed was the thing that it was. Something is only waiting. When the coach arrived at the Rourke estate, the sky had already begun to lose its brightness, and the lamps were flickering like fireflies that had been trapped in jars. What May had envisioned was a ranch. Were there a couple men wrangling steers? Perhaps a beautiful barn. In front of her was a mansion that was made of red brick and was lined with white columns. It was 4 stories tall and had hedges that were groomed to seem like miniature soldiers standing guard. The main mansion shone brightly, along with the individuals who were waiting outside of it. At the top of the stairs, there was a woman who stood with her back straight and her gray hair tied up like a crown. Her attire was black, not because she was in mourning, but because she had a purpose. He was standing to her left, and he had Samson's jaw, but he did not have his warmth. According to the similarities, he is his brother. There was a young lady dressed in ivory lace on her right, and she was too delicate for dust and too fitted for grace. May clenched her fingers increasingly tightly around her bag. It felt like a dare to wear the paper ring that was on her finger. The tone of Samson's speech became more subdued as they descended. I am Rose, and that is my mother. Joseph, my older brother, and Julia Meeks, the woman they anticipated I would marry, find themselves standing next to her. May experienced a dry mouth. Did they anticipate? Both of their eyes met. It was in their plans. It was not anything that I agreed with. What's more, you've brought a bride from the mail home with you. He responded with a resolute no. I brought my wife back over here. The word wife rolled around in her head like stones coming from a river. He stretched out his arm to her. It was taken by her. Almost instantly, the steps appeared. Rose remained unflinching as they got closer to her. As she squeezed her lips together, a line formed that was so thin that it could have been cut out of stone. She remarked that you had arrived really early. Samson wore a grin. We completed our work ahead of schedule, along with bringing company. My sweetheart. This is May Whitlow Rourke. It was articulated by him, with great pride. It was as if the title was a shot sent across the bow. The muscles in Julia's jaw clenched, but she remained silent. Joseph gave a sneer. Attractive, he remarked. Even failed to send out an invitation. This was Samson's response. There was no time. This was a choice that came from the heart. His mother's gaze skimmed over May as she evaluated and measured the situation. From the heart. I get it. Since you were a child, you have always been impulsive. Only when it was absolutely necessary. It was not presented as a welcome. However, neither of these was a protest. At a distance from the family wing, they were escorted to a room designated for guests. The size of the bed was excessive. This stillness is just too loud. May carefully positioned her luggage on the oak dresser and turned her attention to the mirror. Samson was the one who stood behind her and observed her reflection. I should not have led you into this maelstrom in the first place. The glass was the focus of May's attention. It is not true. I entered it with my foot. There is a contrasting aspect. He smiled modestly, expressing his appreciation. It is not necessary for you to impress them. This is not the place for them. On top of that, you are not here for me. Nobody owes me anything. It's true, but I am happy that you are here. They were not intertwined. However, the space that separated them was filled with something that was even more warm than fire. The following morning made an early start. May arose before morning, drew her dress close about her middle, and followed the sound of hooves as they approached. Beyond the manor, the ranch encompassed a large area. There are stables, corrals, outbuildings, and bunkhouses. A slow and precise movement was made by the men, and when they became aware that she was observing, they became rigid. Some people laughed softly. There was a whisper. "Are you sure?" It was the Rourke bride. It would appear that she used up the last one. May continued to stroll. Following her discovery of the cookhouse, she made a request for assistance. The maid in the kitchen was shocked but did not make any comment. It was a painful experience for May's hands as she kneaded dough and rolled up her sleeves. She moved to the side of the table as the meal was brought out. A little after daybreak, Samson made his entrance. His eyes met hers, and he gave a single nod. So that was sufficient. Julia sat across from her in the dining room, slicing fruit with meticulous tiny strokes. She was doing this while she was eating lunch. With a grin on her face, she told Mrs. Rourke, "You have quite the eating appetite." With composure, May addressed her eyes. "Good meal is deserving of this." A smirk appeared on Julia's face. Towards the end of that week, May made an offer to assist in the stables. Joseph chuckled to himself. "Do you ever go for rides, my darling? I have the ability to learn. The horse will be broken by you before you are broken by it." She chose to disregard it. The stable master was asked to find a mare that was gentle. There were 3 falls. I got up at 4. She was able to trot in a straight line by the time the day was over. It was that evening when Samson made his way to her with a cup of cider. According to what he mentioned, they are difficult to win. Trying to win people over is not my goal. I simply will not be leaving. On the porch, he sat down next to her. "By marrying you, I was not trying to make a statement. You were the reason I decided to marry you. I saw more fire in your stillness than I've seen anywhere else in this world." May fixed her gaze to the horizon. "And what exactly happens if the fire destroys the wrong thing? The ash is then used to construct something that is superior." The subsequent days were hazy due to labor. Feeding chickens, patching saddle straps, and mending ripped shirts were some of the things that May did to keep her hands busy. Workers started to acknowledge her with nods. Even some of them touched their headwear. According to the cook, she works with yeast in a careful manner. But tensions increased within the manor. At one point in the evening, Rose surrounded Samson in the study. They were heard by May from the hallway. "She is not a guest in this place. That is where she should be. The Rourke name will be ruined by her. With her weight and her stillness, a woman like that will eventually break it. To marry for financial gain, rather than for the sake of my dignity, there is no Rourke in her blood. Compared to Joseph, she is much more Rourke than he was." There is a pause. "Take care, my son. Loyalty is a distinct concept. Suicide is yet another option." May retreated immediately before they were aware of the pounding in her chest. On that particular evening, Samson did not discuss it. He offered her tea and inquired as to whether or not the stitching was causing her hands to discomfort. She motioned with her head. In a gentle and deliberate manner, he kissed her palm. Compared to any other embrace, it felt more personal. In the morning of the following day, a steady hand came loose and broke his leg. While the others stood there in a state of bewildered disbelief, May went to the doctor. When she came back, she was out of breath, red-faced and enraged. She yelled at them. "You would all rather gossip than move instead. It is imperative that you do not ride slower than the bride if you intend to make fun of her." After that, there was no one who laughed, but the powder keg had already been ignited. One evening, as May was assisting with the stacking of feed bags, a rope broke, which was a rope that she had not touched, and the door to the hayloft became accessible. She was only a few inches away from the wooden edge. Someone let out a gasp. One more person murmured, "That wasn't a coincidence." On that particular evening, a dead rabbit with its throat slashed was situated on their front porch. It is a prod. In May, Samson was shown. There was a chill on his face. "I will talk to Joseph first. He is not going to admit it. A confession is not necessary for me. My need is for him to keep in mind that I am still a Rourke. May made a want to take his hand. "Keep your distance from me. Take a position with me." "So I will." But the storm became more intense. During supper, Julia accidentally brought wine over May's lap, acted as if it had been accidentally done. Nothing was mentioned by Rose. Joseph gave a sneer. After standing up, Samson discarded his napkin and walked out of the room with May. May was sitting on the chilly stone steps outside, gazing up at the sky, with wine dripping down her skirts. Alongside her, Samson knelt down. "You are not required to go through this." She responded, "Yes, I do. I'm afraid that if I run, they would think that I am unable to hold." Her cheek was brushed by him. "Permit me to carry a portion of it then." Her head was resting on his shoulder while she did so. Dusty, the elderly dog that had bonded to her like a young puppy, accompanied her to the market the following morning. She drove Dusty there. She went out and purchased paper, ribbon, and flour. It was a single envelope that she put at Rose's door when she returned to the manor. The note was found within. "Not only will I not make you feel embarrassed, but I will also not vanish. I chose to marry your son rather than your heritage. Kindly allow me to earn my place by my acts rather than by my absence." There was no response to the note. However, Rose did give a single nod when they came face to face the following day. It was not very big, but it was real. At a later time, Joseph encountered her beside the well. "You believe that you are taking the lead, don't you? I believe that I am surviving." He drew more near. "You are not going to survive. Not in this location." She gazed into his eyes. "You have a point. However, I do not have to continue on forever, merely for the purpose of demonstrating that I was never the weaker of the two." Neither of them smiled. That evening, May and Samson were inside the guest parlor where they sat by the fire. It was a dance of flames. His fingers were intertwined with hers. Paper rings are no longer used. An engraved rose was engraved on a little silver bracelet that he purchased for her. "My father used to say that weak men are afraid of powerful women, and he added that you should know this." It was May who faced him. "I take it you have no fear of me?" Her hand was kissed by him. "You are the most courageous person I know, in my opinion." The fire was splintered. On the horizon there was a flash of lightning that could be seen outside. May remained inside, closed her eyes, and whispered as she allowed the warmth to settle in. Allow them to come in then, since she was prepared for it. She was not alone herself either. Sweat and soil were the aromas that permeated the morning air. During her time at the stable yard, May stood with her sleeves rolled up beyond her elbows and her apron covered with grain dust. Despite the fact that the sun had not yet reached its peak, she was already standing up and feeding the roosters while simultaneously calling out to the barn hands by name. While some people have not yet responded, others have. The monotony of ranch life had made its way into her bones. It was slow, unrelenting, and heavily burdened with labor. Her hands had become more resilient. There was a burning sensation in her thighs after each ride, and her back hurt in the evenings. Her posture became more upright as a result of the tiredness she was experiencing. One boy who was not unstable, Micah, who was no more than 12 years old, had begun to follow her around like a faithful shadow. "Have you ever murdered a rattler?" As she chucked grain into the trough, he inquired about it. Not at this time. He appeared to be dissatisfied. "Once, my mother did it, utilizing a flat pan." May threw a grin. "Then your mother is a more admirable woman than I am." "Yeah," Micah acknowledged with a nod. "However, you are not a bad person." This was the very first compliment she had received in the entire week. In the later hours of that day, May assisted the ranch cook in preparing supper for the members of the field crew. While she worked with her arms, she kneaded the dough while humming an old hymn that her mother would sing while she was sewing. When she opened the window, the wind delivered the smell of horses coupled with the dry heat of the day. Her eyes were closed for a little period, and she let the sensation to go across her face. She was being watched by the cook, who remained silent. "When I was in Rourke, I never encountered a woman who had scrubbed the pans." The hands of May were white. "To put up a show is not my thing. In order to clean it, I scrape it." One nod was given by the cook. "They will eventually revert. That is, they won't. Any way you look at it, you will still be standing." The following evening, after supper, Samson took her to the boundary of the land, where a grove of trees was growing next to a brook that was somewhat narrow. Both a blanket and a lantern were carried by him. It was May who carried a sack that contained dried pears, cheese, and bread. When you glance up at night, do you ever find yourself wondering whether someone is in your thoughts? When they had calmed down, he inquired with their legs entangled. Her head was resting on his shoulder while she did so. We used to, and what about now? My curiosity is no longer warranted. There was no further comment from him after that. He just took her hand, stroked his thumb down the curve of her knuckles, and kissed the scar that was located on her wrist. It was the scar that she had received when she was 12 years old and fell into a thicket while chasing a chicken that had escaped. The stars flashed their eyes open. The silence of 100 sleeping animals was transported on the wind by the wind. For a period of time, everything appeared to be calm and genuine. On land that is drenched with pride and past grudges, however, peace does not persist for very long. In the morning of the following day, May saddled a horse and rode it to the west fields, where the fencing needed to be repaired. She used the other hand to accomplish this. She was not invited to the event. Just like that, she appeared. Joseph was the one who rode ahead. The sound of his laughter reverberated through the air. Because Samson was away on a supply run, the men were more courageous in their mutterings because of his absence. Upon their arrival, May immediately grabbed a hammer, grabbed hold of the split rail, and started working on the project. Nobody offered assistance. By the middle of the morning, her arms were shaking, and sweat was dripping down her blouse. However, she would not stop. Reed, with a thick neck and sunburned skin, appeared to be watching her with narrowed eyes from one of the hands. "Lady, you are going to exhaust yourself completely. I am wearing out even more." He laughed and shook his head, but after some time had passed, he walked next to her and nailed the other end of the sentence. As of midday, they had made 3 length adjustments. While they were taking a break to drink water, May sat behind a tree with her fingers blistered. Taking a seat next to her, Micah presented her with a sugar cube that he had secretly taken from the kitchen. "He told me that you had earned this." As if she were a child enjoying a piece of candy, May took it and tucked it between her cheek. Reed, who was standing close to the wagon, cleared his throat using his voice. "I had no idea that you would make it to the morning." May took a closer look at him. "I never did either." He wore a smile that was crooked. "It's not simply the dirt that's under your clothing. It appears that you have grit beneath your nails." That was the last thing. However, it remained in her mind. When Julia got back to the estate, she stood at the window and watched May ride back on horseback. May's face was covered in dust, and her skirt was ripped apart by her sweat. The home was not one of May's sights. On a straight-backed horse, she passed by. With her hands white, Julia turned away from the glass. Rose Rourke waited inside the house in the parlor, drinking tea that had been on the ice for a very long time. Julia murmured, "She is exhibiting her presence to the world." She did not give a response. Julia exerted her pressure. "Once upon a time, you stated that pride was developed via silence. She raises a commotion. She is making progress," Rose responded in a hushed voice. "Even more perilous is the fact that, at the time when Samson returned that evening, May was bathing her feet in a tin basin that was located on the back porch. The strands of her hair that were loose were curling against her neck and were pinned up. He got down on his knees next to her, gripped her hand, and brought it to his lips. It has been reported that you repaired 50% of the west fence." "No, I did not break it, but I did assist in repairing it." He wore a grin. "People are referring to you as Iron Dove. It's the dove that I'd rather have." His smile began to fade. "It is no longer something that they say." She responded with a negative. "However, I do recall, when he went to bed that night, he gently drew her into bed next to him. There is no anticipation, there is no hurry. In the darkness, there is nothing but warmth, breath, and repeated heartbeats." She whispered as she placed her head on his chest. "It never occurred to me that a man like you would be interested in a woman like me." Her hair was stroked by him. "Because you were unaware of the immense value that lies within a lady who is reserved but possesses a fiery spirit within her." Earlier than she did, he took a nap. She remained awake through the night, staring at the ceiling and listening to his breath. On the following morning, a fresh insult was delivered. Subtle but piercingly sharp. The hem of her riding skirt had been stitched shut by an unknown person. The discovery was made by May right before the mounting. She did not make a request for assistance. Having located a knife, she proceeded to cut it open and then left the threads on the steps of the porch. After some time had passed, a saddle had been altered. She came dangerously close to falling once more. She was able to catch herself in the middle of her slide this time, and Micah came running. "It's not safe," he said to himself. "Someone is expecting you to leave." For a moment, May gazed at the barn, then the porch, and finally the hills in the distance. Then there is going to be a person who is dissatisfied. She returned to the house, went right into the dining room, and turned her attention to Rose. "I have experienced violence. I decided to swallow my embarrassment. Therefore, I will no longer act as though I do not belong in this place." Rose delicately placed her teacup on the table. "You have demonstrated that you are capable of working, but are you capable of taking the lead? Please allow me to demonstrate." The more senior woman gave a single nod. "1 week from now is harvest. Create a meal plan. Feed 50 people." The head of May was bowed. "You are correct, ma'am." For the subsequent 6 days, the kitchen was a hive of activity and pandemonium. May was a lightning-fast worker, swift, unrelenting, and well-intentioned. Her hands were coordinated for cleaning, peeling, boiling, and baking. And she organized the cupboard. She also laid out the weekly menus. She did not take a seat. The maximum amount of time she slept was 4 hours. The cracks appeared on her feet. Her fingers were bleeding. However, when the day of harvest arrived, in spite of the fact that they were exhausted and hungry, the field laborers feasted like kings. A beef stew that is sufficiently thick to support a spoon. The cornbread was buttered, and it melted on the tongue like the sun setting. It was a berry pie that could put even the most harsh mouths to rest. At the conclusion of the event, Reed hoisted his cup. To Mrs. Rourke, a woman whose hands were covered in jewels and ash. The other people applauded. Following that, May sat on the back step with her feet once more in the basin. While sitting on her lap, Dusty, the dog, laid his head. Her eyes were only partially closed due to tiredness, but her chest was rising with the sensation of something warm. When Samson discovered her there, he presented her with a tiny package. The compartment contained a necklace, a chain made of silver, and a simple pendant in the shape of a flame. According to him, "For your fire." Leaning into his chest, she did so. "I am grateful to you." After some time had passed, Julia unexpectedly entered Rose's chamber. "This is just insanity. She is gaining their favor. Every single one." Rose remarked that she was not successful. "She is able to survive." "However, you mentioned that. When I claimed that pride is silence, I meant it. However, there are occasions when pride also involves listening and learning." Julia exhibited a distorted face. "You are being made ridiculous by her." "No," Rose responded. "I am improving as a woman as a result of her." May was standing in her room by the other side of the hallway, brushing her hair. With a fiercer and more powerful appearance, she glanced at her mirror, which was neither thinner nor different. She heard her name being spoken with affection from the lower level, and she heard laughter. There was a whispering voice in her thoughts that said, "They are beginning to see you." May, for the very first time in her life, did not flinch when she turned her attention in her own direction. It was a smile. For the reason that dirt may bury things, yet it can also grow things. As a result of pressure, diamonds are formed. In the moments immediately before dawn, a thin silver strand of smoke twisted upward from the edge of the east barn, appearing to be a warning that no one wanted to believe. Initially, May awoke with a cough. The odor struck her chest like a stone, and it smelled like charred wood, charred hay, and something that was harsh and inhuman. After hurling the blankets aside, she dashed to the window without wearing any shoes. An orange glow emanated from the horizon, forming a distinct line that divided the morning in half. Samson suddenly jumped up next to her. "Who or what is responsible for that?" May commented on the barn while she was already getting her boots. "It is currently ablaze." He did not inquire as to how she was aware of it. Simply put, he followed. When they finally arrived at the barn, the flames had already climbed halfway up the sidewalls of the structure. As their hooves slammed into the stalls, the horses inside in the barn let out a scream. The ranch worker stood motionless, its eyes wide open, and a bucket dangling from its sluggish fingers. May didn't take a break. She pushed him away, wrenched open the gate, and burst into the smoke as quickly as she could. The interior was a chaotic, hot, deafening, and uncomfortable place to be. The wood splintered in the air. As if from hell, sparks began to fall from the sky. May's hands were shaking as she ripped at latches, kicked at doors that were stuck, smacked scared flanks, and yelled over the roar because she was so terrified. One of the mares reared and came dangerously close to hitting her. While coughing and her eyes watering, she dodged. A scream could be heard coming from behind her. In the vicinity of the rear corner, Micah was ensnared beneath a fallen beam. This pinned his leg. He had a little face that was covered with soot and seemed terrified. May made a strong advance. "Put your feet up, Micah." Her hands were pricked by the shattered wood and they burned. The object would not move. Only a few seconds later, Samson came. Together, they lifted the beam and heaved it to the point where May was able to liberate the youngster from its grasp. During the time that the roof was beginning to crackle and buckle, she slung him over her shoulder and stumbled toward the entrance. Just as the roof collapsed behind them, they exploded out of the building. A startled quiet could be heard coming from the gathering outside. Reed snatched the child away from May's embrace. An individual yelled out for water. One more person shed tears. May was hunched over, with her hands on her knees, and she coughed until her ribcage howled in pain. Her ankle was licked by Dusty, who yelled at her. She felt a hand placed on her back by Samson. "In that room, you might have passed away. It wasn't me." He nodded, his jaw clenched. Unintentionally, this was done by someone. May was already aware of it. Joseph stood at the edge of the crowd with his arms crossed, 2 hands quiet, and his eyes calculating. She noticed this in the manner that he stood. Samson was also aware of it. The man did not wait. As he approached his brother, he did so with his fists clenched. "That is what you did." Joseph did not recoil in fear. "You introduced a sense of inferiority into this home. It was cleaned up by me. You set fire to a farm that contained minors inside." Joseph sneered and said, "Only one. It's a shame that she brought the rest together with her." Joseph was knocked to the ground, and blood began to flow from his lip as the blow landed across his jaw in a sudden and violent manner. He retreated, missed, and then slammed Samson to the ground with a tackle. They engaged in a fight in the open yard, with fists pounding and kicks falling with a ferocity that was terrible. Concerned about whether or not to intervene, the ranch hand circled around. Not a single May moved. Joseph did not pull out a knife until he reached into his boot and drew it out. "Do not!" the woman yelled. Someone else, however, moved more quickly. When Rose raged, taking a step forward, she grabbed Joseph's arm and smacked the blade out of his hand for good measure. A sharp and conclusive sound was produced. The voice was still as she whispered, "Enough." Joseph was taken aback and reeled again. "You're taking her side, are you?" Rose stated in a chilly tone. "I am siding with honor. And the day you attempted to burn a woman out of her own name was the day you lost yours entirely." Joseph searched from one person to the next. No one ever supported him. "It's not even Julia." He then turned around and stalked away after spitting on the ground. Despite her legs shaking, May stood there, her breath still ragged. When Rose came closer, "I invite you to accompany me." As May followed her into the mansion, she proceeded down the lengthy hallway, passing pictures of stone-faced forefathers and velvet-lined parlors that immediately felt less daunting. Within the study, Rose poured May a cup of tea and motioned for her to take a seat. "It wasn't necessary for you to get into the fire," she was saying. "In fact, I did. You have demonstrated your case a very long time ago." "Nothing was being demonstrated by me. I was trying to save a youngster." Rose placed the teacup on the table. "In the past, I believed that legacy was synonymous with blood. However, this is not the case. When everyone else is watching, it is the person who stands." Nothing was said by May. Her voice was soft as she spoke. "I gave birth to one coward. On the other hand, I became a mother today. Unanticipated and weighty, the word struck like a downpour of thunder." After reaching into her pocket, Rose retrieved a key and placed it on the table. "This was a gift that your father-in-law gave to me on our wedding day. The pantry, the kitchen garden, and the budget for the meals are all included. I would prefer for you to take control of it at this moment, by means of your own hands, your own unique manner." May, in a state of shock, touched the key. "As for me, I am at a loss for words. You have previously covered every single point, utilizing your stubbornness, your stillness, and your fire." In the evening, Samson discovered May sitting on the porch. The lengthy, quiet bath she had taken had left her hair still damp, and her outfit was spotless. The pendant of silver flames that she wore at her throat gleamed. As he approached her, he knelt down. "He stated that I had married you too quickly." May made a blinking motion. "Using that at the beginning of a love confession is quite peculiar," and he smiled. I'll finish up now. I got married to you prematurely, but I would marry you once more. It is slower, with a greater number of blooms, in addition to the firefly, through the use of music, with the entire freaking town watching, of course. It's not because I require them to see it, rather it's because I want the entire world to recognize that you altered it. He was the subject of her gaze. Are you very serious? A tiny package was pulled out by him. It was a ring, and this time it was made of solid gold, an unassuming diamond that shines as brightly as the sun rising. Would you be willing to marry me once more, May Whitlow Rourke? It was not out of need that I did it, but in love. Her voice took a pause. I was under the impression that you would never inquire. Under the porch lantern they shared a tender and unhurried kiss, as if they were two individuals who had finally come to terms with the fact that the storm had passed. 1 week later, the entire community joined together for the second ceremony, which took place under the open sky. A deep, rose-colored frock that May had embroidered herself was the garment that she wore. The flowers from the meadow were used to secure her hair. Her physique was more robust than that of any of the brides in the pews who were wearing lace, but that was no longer seen by anyone. They witnessed her blaze, her struggle, for her heart. A trellis made of oak and thread was placed beneath the altar, and Samson waited there. He did not look at the people in the crowd. He did not look anywhere else except at her. Rose proudly stood behind him as he spoke. Those rings were borne by Micah. Dusty sent out a bark as soon as he heard the fiddle's opening notes. Under the same constellations, where they had previously only spoken in silence, they exchanged their vows. In addition, when the kiss arrived, it was simultaneously thunder, spring rain, and daybreak all at the same time. Once she had finished, May opened her eyes and said, "Are you still certain about me?" When Samson laughed. Now, more than at any other time. There was a party that continued well into the night. There were bonfires, fiddles, bread kept warm by the embers, and wine was handed from person to person. In the middle of the conversation, Julia silently left, and no one followed her. Joseph did not come back alive. After several weeks had passed, May strolled along the garden path with Dusty by her side, her hand resting on her expanding tummy. As if it were the first green shoot to emerge from frostbitten soil, the kid that was within of her stirred. During her time on the porch, Rose was repairing a torn apron. Micah's reading from a newspaper was done orally. The ranch hands were inside, and Samson was laughing with them. Ken took a moment to soak it all in. It is the house, and the hills, a country that had previously attempted to spit her out but now pulsed with the beat of her footfall, created a hum that could be heard. This was hers. She had not purchased it. She had not received it as a present. And she claimed it. She sat on the stairs, one hand cupping her tummy, and in that golden light with a breeze that was warmed by the fire and the aroma of bread on the wind, May muttered, "I was never too much. When the right man was looking for me at the appropriate time, I was always just enough." In the distance, church bells rang, not for the sake of warning or grief, but rather for the purpose of making vows that were created in ash and forged in love. Dusty growled softly, as if agreeing with the statement.